Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have a billionaire father? If the answer in your head is evening gowns, luxury cars, vacations in Europe, and a life where you never have to worry about anything, then maybe you have imagined it half right. The other half is the part no one posts on social media. It is the feeling of living inside a golden cage where every door can be opened with money, but none of those doors truly belongs to you. My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 28 years old, born and raised in New York. My father, Victor Whitmore, is one of the most powerful real estate tycoons in Manhattan. People say he owns almost half the city. I do not know if that is true, but I know one thing for certain. He has always lived as if the whole world were nothing more than a contract waiting for his signature. Since I was a child, my life had been planned by my father like a long-term investment project. Which preschool I would attend, which high school, which university, what major I would choose, which friends were allowed into our home, and which man was qualified to sit beside me at a family dinner. All of it was already in his mind, clear, cold, and not open to revision. When I was 16 during a dinner, at our penthouse, overlooking Central Park, my father once set down his wine glass and said something I still remember to this day. Clara, love is a luxury for poor people. People like us do not marry for feelings. We marry for strategy. Back then, I was too young to fight back. I only sat there in silence watching the city lights reflect against the glass windows, wondering that if I ever truly loved someone one day, would my father see it as an emotion, or simply as a mistake that needed to be corrected. Years later, I got my answer. 8 months ago, I fell in love with a man my father called trash from Queens. His name was Ethan Hale. He was a mechanic with rough hands shirts that often smelled of motor oil, a small apartment and an old car. My father would never have allowed to park in front of our family building. But Ethan was the first person who looked at me like a human being, not like a future share of Whitmore Holdings. He did not ask how much money I had. He did not ask who my father knew. He did not ask what I could bring to his life. He only asked how I liked my coffee, what made me laugh, and how long it had been since I was allowed to decide how one day of my life would go. I thought that if love was real enough, I could endure anything. I was wrong. Because on my wedding day, in front of 300 guests, my father stood up, raised his champagne glass, and announced to the entire room that I was no longer his daughter. He said I had chosen poverty over family. He said my husband was a freeloader, a mechanic with nothing but dirty hands and empty pockets. He said that from that moment on, I was cut out of the will, the trust fund, and everything that carried the Whitmore name. The entire room went silent. My mother lowered her head. My brother smiled. The same people who had hugged me, congratulated me, and shared wine with my family now looked at me as if I had burned my own life to the ground. But what my father did not know was that the man he had just humiliated was not penniless. And the wedding he turned into a stage to destroy me would become the beginning of his own downfall. If you have ever been looked down on by your family because of the choice you made, comment number 1. Because this story is not just about money. It is about the price of freedom and the moment a woman stops begging to be loved. And everything truly began on an autumn evening inside the cold penthouse of the Whitmore family, when I told my father I was going to marry a man he had never met. That night, New York glittered beneath us, but inside the Whitmore family dining room, everything felt as cold as stone. The penthouse on the Upper East Side had glass walls overlooking Central Park. My father often said that all he had to do was stand there, and he could see what belonged to him. As I grew older, I understood that he had never been joking. A 12-seat dining table sat in the center of the room, its walnut surface gleaming beneath the crystal chandelier. My mother Elaine sat across from me with a thin smile. My older brother Nolan scrolled through his phone while cutting into his steak. And my father sat at the head of the table like a judge, who had already decided the verdict. "Keep your schedule open this Saturday," my father said. "The Wells family is coming for dinner. Harrison Wells is handling the new investment division." I set down my knife and fork. "I can't meet him on Saturday." My father lifted his eyes. Why? There is someone I want to introduce to the family. Nolan stopped scrolling. My mother blinked. My father did not move. Who? His name is Ethan Hale. I have been seeing him for 6 months. Silence fell across the table. It felt like the moment right before glass shatters. 6 months, my father repeated. You have been dating a man for 6 months without telling your family. I don't think the person I love needs approval. My mother drew in a very soft breath, as if I had said something obscene at the dinner table. My father set down his wineglass. What family does he come from? The Hales from Connecticut. You don't know his family. Nolan's mouth curved into a smirk, the kind of amusement someone shows when they can already see an accident about to happen. What does he do? My father asked. I knew what he was really asking was not about his job. He was asking for the market value of the man I loved. He's a mechanic. He owns a small garage in Queens. My mother's fork froze in her hand. Nolan laughed. My father did not. He stared at me for a long time, so long that I felt as if I were no longer his daughter but a failed investment. A mechanic, he said. Victor Whitmore's daughter wants to bring home a mechanic. He is a good man. Good men do not build empires, Clara. I clenched my hands beneath the table. I don't need an empire. I need a life that belongs to me. My father stood. You do not have a separate life if that life is built on the Whitmore name. Everything you have came from that name. I only want you to meet him. No. One short word. Cold, final, absolute. My mother finally spoke. Clara, you are just emotional right now. Some wrong choices cannot be undone. I looked at her hoping to see even a trace of tenderness, but she only looked back at me with the eyes of a woman who was afraid of losing her place in the world her husband had created. End this before it stains the family name, my father said. I stood up. I will not end it. For the first time in my life, I saw my father freeze. Only for a second. But it was enough for me to know that he was not used to being refused. He looked at me, his voice dropping lower. Then you should prepare to lose more than you think. I left the dining table in a heavy silence. Behind me, no one called me back. That night, as the elevator carried me down from that building, I still did not know that one name, Ethan Hale, was enough to make my father start a war. I met Ethan Hale on a Tuesday afternoon when I was not supposed to have any free time. That day, I had just walked out of a meeting at Whitmore Holdings, where my father had publicly called the marketing plan. I had spent 3 weeks preparing, barely acceptable for someone still learning. I was 28 years old. I had an MBA. I had spent 3 years working in the family company. But in his eyes, I was still just a little girl in an expensive suit, trying to prove she was useful. I did not want to go back to the penthouse. I did not want to hear my mother tell me I needed to understand my father. I did not want to see Nolan give me that faint smile and say that at least I still had a job because of them. So I took a taxi to Brooklyn and got out in front of a small coffee shop tucked between 2 old bookstores. Inside, there was no marble, no waiter calling me Miss Whitmore, and no eyes that recognized me. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner. I stirred it for a long time without drinking. Maybe because if I drank it, I would have to admit that I was shaking. Bad day. I looked up. Ethan was standing beside my table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded flannel shirt. There was a streak of machine oil on his sleeve that had not washed out. His hands were rough, but his eyes were strangely gentle. He did not look at me like something expensive. He looked at me as if all I had to say was yes, and he would listen. Is it that obvious? I asked. You've been stirring that coffee for almost 10 minutes. I'm starting to feel sorry for it. I laughed. Not the polite kind of laugh I used at charity dinners. A real laugh. Small, but enough to make my chest feel lighter. He asked if he could sit with me. I did not know why I nodded. Maybe because for the first time that day no one was asking me to prove anything. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about his small garage in Queens, where he repaired old cars other people were ready to throw away. I told him about work, but I did not tell him my last name. I only said I worked in real estate and felt trapped inside a life that was too small for me. Ethan did not ask who my father was. He did not ask where I lived. He did not ask how much I made. He only asked what I would want to do if no one had the right to be disappointed in me. That question left me silent for a long time. I had never thought about it before. When he walked me to the subway station, it was already dark. Brooklyn smelled of old rain traffic smoke and warm bread. Ethan walked beside me without trying to touch my hand, without trying to impress me. Before I went down the stairs, he said, "I don't care what your last name is. I just want to know what makes you feel alive." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. In the weeks that followed, I found excuses to return to that coffee shop. Then we had dinner at small restaurants, walked down streets where no one knew my name, and sat on front steps talking about simple things. Ethan always paid in cash with folded dollar bills from an old leather wallet. I thought he was careful with money. I thought he felt uncomfortable stepping into my world. I did not know he was hiding another world of his own. All I knew then was that beside Ethan for the first time I was not Victor Whitmore's daughter. I was just Clara. And to me that was dangerous enough to become love. 3 days after that dinner, my father's assistant called to say he wanted to see me at the main office of Whitmore Holdings. She used a very polite voice, but I understood it was not an invitation. In my family, when my father said he wanted to see you, it meant you had been summoned. The Whitmore Holdings building stood in the financial district so tall that every time I walked into the lobby, I felt as if I were entering a place built to worship my father's power. The marble floors shone like glass. Expensive paintings hung on the walls. The receptionists lowered their heads at exactly the right angle. Everything there was designed to remind people that Victor Whitmore did not need to raise his voice. His money already spoke for him. When I entered his office on the 42nd floor, my father was standing in front of the glass wall looking down at the city as if it were a chessboard. On his desk sat a grey folder. "Sit down," he said. I did not sit. He turned around and picked up the folder. Ethan Hale, 32 years old. Lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Owns a small auto repair shop called Hale Custom Garage. No significant assets. No political connections. No investment history. No seat on any board. Does not appear at social events. Does not belong to any family worth mentioning. Every sentence he read felt like a razor slicing through the air. You had him investigated. Of course. You had no right. He closed the folder. When a man with no clear background approaches my daughter, I have every right. He didn't approach me for money. My father laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Clara, you are still so naive, it is almost pitiful. Everyone wants something. Poor people want to enter the world of the rich. Weak people want to cling to the powerful. He is simply smarter than the others because he knows how to play the role of someone who needs nothing." I looked at him suddenly exhausted. Have you ever thought that maybe I love him because he is nothing like you? The air in the room seemed to thicken. My father's eyes darkened. Watch your words. I have been watching my words my whole life. He walked to the desk and pushed the folder toward me. End it. Today. I will not let a mechanic from Queens destroy everything I have built for you. You built it for yourself, I said quietly. Not for me. This time he did not lose his temper right away. He only looked at me with the cold eyes of a man who had just decided to withdraw an investment. Then from now on you can pay the price for your own choices. I left the office without taking the folder. But when I stepped into the elevator, my hands were shaking so badly that I had to hold on to the metal rail beside me. I knew my father would not stop at threats. He had never lost a deal just because the other side said no. The first blow came the next morning. I was at a bridal boutique on Fifth Avenue, standing among layers of white silk and soft light, when the consultant walked over with an uncomfortable smile. "Miss Whitmore, your card has been declined." I thought it was a system error. I handed her another card, then my backup card, then the card my mother had once told me to use only for important occasions. All of them were declined. I called the bank from inside the fitting room. The woman on the other end of the line gently explained that I had been removed from all secondary accounts, my card access had been cancelled, and the primary account holder had requested it the night before. The primary account holder. My father. I sat down on the fitting room floor, the wedding dress spreading around my legs like a strange white cloud. In the mirror, I saw a 28-year-old woman with an education, a job, and a famous last name who suddenly could not pay for her own wedding dress. Ethan arrived almost an hour later. He did not ask many questions. He simply sat down beside me and took a stack of cash from his wallet bound with a rubber band. "Let me help you." I looked at the $100 bills in his hand. Too many. Too calm. An ordinary mechanic did not carry cash like that. But at that moment, I was too humiliated to ask questions. All I knew was that my father had started surrounding me. And if I wanted to keep Ethan, I would have to learn how to live without the golden cage protecting me anymore. Ethan proposed to me on a Sunday morning in his small apartment in Queens. There was no elegant restaurant, no violin, no camera capturing the moment. There was only sunlight falling through the window and slightly burned pancakes. He placed a small velvet box on the kitchen table between 2 cups of coffee. "I know I am not the man your family wanted," Ethan said. "I don't have a penthouse. I don't have a private jet. I don't have a name that makes people lower their voices in respect. But I promise I will never turn you into something I own. I will never make you feel small just so I can feel bigger." The ring was not too large, just a soft, bright diamond on a thin gold band. But to me, it was more beautiful than every piece of jewelry my mother had ever worn. I said yes before he could even finish asking. That evening, I called my mother. I thought she would cry from emotion, or at least pretend to be a little happy. But the other end of the line stayed silent for a long time. "You are killing me, Clara," she said. "I am only getting married. To a man no one knows. Do you understand how humiliating this is for your father? I am not getting married to make father proud. I am marrying Ethan because I love him." My mother exhaled. "Love does not preserve status, Clara. Love will not protect you when society turns its back on you." An hour later, Nolan texted me. "I heard you're marrying a car repairman. Brave. Hope you enjoy small apartments and doing your own laundry." I did not reply. The final call came from my father. He only said, "You want a wedding, don't you? Fine. I will give you a wedding you will never forget." I should have heard the threat inside those words. But at that moment, I was too happy, too certain that if I had chosen love, everyone else would eventually accept it. I was wrong. Old friends began to disappear. Lunch plans were canceled. Messages stopped getting answered. One friend from prep school told me her mother had advised her not to be seen with me because her family still did business with Whitmore Holdings. When my father stopped guaranteeing my value, they stopped pretending to care about me. Ethan and I had planned to hold a small wedding at a restaurant in Brooklyn. 50 guests. A simple cake. One evening that belonged to us. That was what I kept telling myself as I stepped out of the car in front of the restaurant wearing a wedding dress bought with my own savings. But when the door opened, I froze. Inside, there were not 50 people. There were nearly 300 guests. Women in Chanel. Men in tailored suits. My father's business partners, my mother's old friends. They filled. The restaurant spilled into the back garden and raised their champagne glasses as if they had been invited to watch a play. And in the middle of it all, my father stood there smiling. "Surprised, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek before I could pull away. "I told you. This will be a wedding. You will never forget." Ethan held my hand. "We can leave right now." I looked at that room, at my father's triumphant smile, and took a deep breath. "No," I said. "I am still getting married today." If you have ever had to walk into a room where everyone was waiting for you to fall apart, comment, "I understand." Because some days simply refusing to run away is already a victory. I did not know that my father had no intention of stopping there. The wedding had not been ruined yet. It had only just been stolen. The ceremony unfolded under a kind of tension that only Ethan and I could truly feel. My father's guests sat in the back, whispering, tilting their heads as they watched my every movement, as if they were witnessing a deal on the edge of collapse. The few friends we had tried to smile, but I could see the worry in their eyes. And my father sat in the front row, legs crossed, one hand resting on the head of his silver cane, calm in a way that terrified me. As I walked toward Ethan, I looked only at him. If I looked at my mother, I would see the pretend tears on her silk handkerchief. If I looked at Nolan, I would see that half smile on his face. If I looked at the people who once called me their friend, I would remember that many of them had not come here to bless me, but to watch me be put back in the place my father wanted me to be. Ethan stood at the end of the aisle in a simple dark blue suit. There was no panic on his face. No shame. Only calm, warm eyes, as if in that room full of knives hidden beneath smiles, he was still the only place where I could set my feet down without falling. We exchanged our vows. My voice caught when I said I chose him not because he could give me an easy life, but because beside him I was allowed to live honestly. Ethan looked at me for a long moment and said, "I promise I will never use love to control you. I promise I will stand beside you, even when the whole world wants you to stand alone." For one brief moment, I believed it was over. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. Ethan kissed me. Applause rose through the room, thin, at first, then gradually warmer. I heard a few of our friends laughing. I heard champagne glasses being lifted. I heard my heart pounding inside my chest. It should have been the most beautiful moment of my life. Then came the sound of a spoon tapping against a glass. Aunts. Then again, the room slowly went quiet. My father stood. He held a glass of champagne in his hand and smiled like a father preparing to bless his daughter. But I knew that smile. It was the smile he wore right before he suffocated an opponent in a boardroom. "May I have a few minutes, please?" he said, his voice carrying clearly through the restaurant. "I am Victor Whitmore, the father of the bride." No one dared to breathe too loudly. He turned toward me. "I have spent my life building a name. Whitmore is not just a surname. It is a legacy. It is power. It is a standard very few people are capable of reaching." He paused at exactly the right moment, long enough for everyone to look at Ethan. I once hoped my daughter would understand that. I once hoped Clara would choose a man worthy of what this family represents. Ethan's hand tightened gently around mine, just enough to remind me that he was still there. "But today," my father continued, his voice growing colder, "my daughter has chosen a mechanic from Queens. A man with no assets, no status, no family name, and nothing to place on the table except oil-stained hands and one pitiful little apartment." A few murmurs rose around the room. I saw one woman cover her mouth. One man lowered his head, maybe out of second-hand embarrassment, or maybe because he was trying to hide a smile. My mother did not look at me. Nolan did. And he was smiling. My father lifted his glass higher. "So I want everyone here to witness this. From this moment on, Clara Whitmore is no longer my daughter in any practical sense. She is removed from my will, cut off from the trust fund, stripped of every benefit connected to Whitmore Holdings. If Clara wants to choose poverty over family, then she will receive exactly what she has chosen. The room went completely silent. I could hear phone cameras switching on. I could hear someone inhale. I could hear my own breath catching in my throat. My father set his glass down on our table. "Congratulations, my daughter," he said. "You finally have your freedom. Let us see how long freedom can feed you." I thought I would cry. I thought my knees would give out. But strangely, in that moment, what I felt most clearly was not pain. It was clarity. Because when my father stood in the middle of my wedding and used 300 people as witnesses to erase my name from the family, I saw the final truth. He had never been afraid that I was marrying the wrong man. He was only afraid that I no longer needed him. Ethan stood before I did. He was not rushed, not angry, in the way a man might be when insulted in front of a crowd. He simply adjusted his cuff, placed his napkin on the table, and looked straight at my father with calm eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said. "And thank you for such a clear blessing." My father laughed with contempt. "A blessing? You and my daughter were just declared penniless, and you are still trying to perform." "We are not penniless," Ethan replied. "I have my wife. She has her freedom. To me, that is enough." My father stepped closer. "Do you think pretty words can feed her? Clara is used to a life you could never understand. One day, she will wake up in that tiny apartment of yours and realize she traded an empire for a man who has nothing." Ethan smiled faintly. "You may be surprised by the things you do not know." That sentence made my father's smile falter. There was something in Ethan's voice that unsettled him. I knew that if I let him continue, this wedding would forever be remembered only as the scene where he humiliated us. So I stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor. That small sound made everyone turn toward me. I looked at the 300 faces in front of me. The curious ones, the pitying ones, the satisfied ones, and even a few who looked genuinely hurt for me. I had spent my whole life fearing their eyes, fearing that I would become the story whispered about at dinner parties. But that day, I suddenly understood something. When a person has lost everything others use to control them, they also lose the reason to be afraid. "My father believes money is the only measure of a person," I said. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. "He believes love is a transaction, family is an investment, and children only have value when they serve the right plan." I spent years trying to become the daughter he wanted. The right schools, the right degree, the right job, the right smile. I did everything just to hear him say he was proud of me. But all I ever received was barely acceptable, tolerable, not good enough. Today, I choose a man who loves me when I no longer have credit cards, no longer have a position in the company, and no longer have the protection of the Whitmore name. If the price of that love is being erased from a will, then what I lost never truly belonged to me. I looked at my father one final time. "You said I chose poverty." "No. I chose a life where I do not need your permission to be happy." A single clap came from the corner of the room. Then another. Then more. Not everyone joined in, but it was enough to break the silence my father had tried to use to bury me. About 30 people stood up and left. My father walked out too, with my mother and Nolan following behind him like two shadows. But more than 200 people stayed. They looked at me like a bride who had just saved her own wedding day. Ethan took my hand as the music began again. "Are you okay?" he asked. I rested my head against his shoulder. For the first time in my life, I think I am. But as he held me, I still felt a secret standing between us. I did not understand it yet. But I knew the story was not over. 6 weeks after the wedding, I learned that freedom was not always light. There were mornings when I woke up in our small apartment in Brooklyn, listening to the garbage truck outside, staring at the old paint on the ceiling, and reminding myself that I had chosen this. I had chosen a life without housekeepers, changing fresh flowers every day without a driver waiting downstairs, without a black card that could solve every uncomfortable situation. But in that same apartment for the first time in my life, I also knew what it felt like to wake up without having to guess what my father would be disappointed about that day. Ethan made coffee every morning. He remembered that I liked a little sugar and plenty of hot milk, and he always placed the cup on the right side of my laptop because he knew I was right-handed. Those small things were not what I had been taught to value. In my father's world, love had to be proven with diamonds, shares, mansions, and the last name of the person standing across from you. Ethan proved it by standing beside me on the days when I had nothing left to show anyone. But the world outside was not as gentle as he was. I sent my resume to 43 marketing companies across the city. Major corporations in Midtown, small agencies in Soho brand management roles, and jobs far below my experience level. At first I thought I only needed to be patient. I had the degree, the experience, and real ability. But the rejection letters came too quickly, too steadily, too much alike. Thank you for your interest. We have chosen a candidate who is a better fit. At this time, we are unable to move forward. Some companies had even reached out to me for interviews before the wedding, then went completely silent afterward. Finally, an old acquaintance sent me a private message. Just one short sentence. No one wants to upset Victor Whitmore, Clara. I am sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time. The Whitmore name, which had once opened doors for me, had now become the lock on the outside of them. My father did not need to call every company. All he needed was for the city to know he had disowned me, and the rest operated on its own, like a machine powered by fear. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by Bill's rejection emails and a notebook filled with spending plans. I still tried to pay half the rent even though Ethan had never asked me to. Maybe it was the last piece of pride I had left. I did not want to go from being a daughter supported by her father's money to being a wife supported by her husband's pity. You don't have to prove anything to me, Ethan said. But I need to prove it to myself. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. That was what I loved about him. Ethan did not take my battle from me just so he could look like a hero. He only stood close enough for me to know that if I fell, I would not fall alone. But the longer I stayed beside him, the more I began to notice pieces that did not fit. Ethan said he was a mechanic, but there were nights when I woke up at 2 a.m. and found him standing in the living room, speaking quietly on the phone. The forecast for next quarter needs to be revised before the board meeting. Another time I heard him talking about data infrastructure, technical audits, and expansion budgets. When I stepped out, he ended the call very quickly. Just garage work, he said. I looked at him. A small garage in Queens did not have a board of directors. An ordinary mechanic did not use phrases like Northeast market strategy, and a poor husband did not pull out thick stacks of cash with such calm ease. I began to feel afraid. Not because he was poor. I had chosen him when I believed he was poor. I was afraid because I had fallen in love with a man I did not fully understand. 3 months after the wedding, my mother called. Her voice was soft as velvet. You still have time to come back, Clara. Your father has not officially changed all the paperwork yet. You mean I have to leave Ethan? I am only saying you should think about your future. I looked at Ethan repairing an old chair on the balcony, his sleeves rolled up, sunlight falling across his shoulders. Very quietly, I said, I am thinking about my future. If you have ever had to start again from nothing just to keep your self-respect, comment starting over. Because sometimes losing everything is not as frightening as discovering that you never truly owned your life in the first place. I did not know that while I was trying to find an ordinary job, Ethan was waiting for the right moment to tell me the truth. And that truth would force the entire Whitmore family to look again at the man they had once looked down on. 4 months after the wedding, I received an envelope from a lawyer named Vivian Cole. On the envelope, my name was written as Clara Whitmore Hale. I stared at that name for a long time. Whitmore was the name that had once opened every door, then slammed them shut in my face. Hale was the new name, simpler and quieter, but every time I read it I felt as if I could breathe. Vivian's office was inside an old brownstone on the Upper West Side. It was not as glamorous as the law firms my father usually hired, but it felt solid. Vivian had once been my grandmother, Eleanor Reed's lawyer. My grandmother was the only person in the family who had ever truly seen me. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hale," Vivian said. Those 2 words alone tightened my throat. For the first time, someone had called me by my new name without treating it like a fall from grace. Vivian placed a thin file in front of me. "Mrs. Eleanor left a separate fund for you. It is completely independent of your father's assets. According to her instructions, I was only allowed to contact you once you married someone of your own choosing, especially if that choice was not approved by Miss Victor." I froze. Grandmother knew. Vivian nodded. "She knew what kind of man your father was. She also knew that one day you would have to choose between your own life and his control." I opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were the documents for a trust fund worth $500,000. To my father, it was probably a small number. But to me, it felt like an emergency door my grandmother had quietly built for me years ago. At the end of the file was a letter. My grandmother's handwriting leaned slightly to one side, delicate and familiar enough to make me want to cry. "My dear Clara, if you are reading this letter, it means you have finally chosen with your heart. I am proud of you. Money does not give a person value. It only magnifies who they truly are. Do not live inside someone else's prison anymore. Use this gift to build something that belongs to you." I cried right there in that office. Not the kind of crying that comes from despair, but the kind that comes when someone finally realizes she was never completely abandoned. 1 month later, I founded Reed Creative, named after my grandmother's maiden name. I rented a small corner in a co-working space in Soho, designed the logo myself, and wrote my own introduction emails to business owners who had nothing to do with my father's network. My first client was the coffee shop where I had met Ethan. Then came an old bookstore in the Village, and a family restaurant in Queens. One project at a time, I began to have clients who did not call me Victor Whitmore's daughter. They called me Clara, the woman who delivered on time and created real results. Some nights I came home so exhausted I could barely take off my shoes. Ethan would simply put dinner on the table and sit beside me. "You are building something of your own," he said. I smiled, my eyes burning. "Not Whitmore's. Mine." But just as Reed Creative was beginning to stand on its own, a strange email appeared. The sender was Nexus AI Technologies. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership. I did not understand why a major tech company would reach out to me. Not until Ethan saw the name on my screen and went unusually silent. The email from Nexus AI stayed in my inbox all afternoon. A technology company the press called a billion-dollar ghost wanted to work with a small agency that had only just been founded. The wording was polite, but something about it felt unusual. That evening when Ethan came home, I opened my laptop and showed it to him. "Nexus AI knows about me," I said. "Don't you find that strange?" He stood behind my chair and stayed silent longer than usual. "It is a good company," he said. "I am not asking whether the company is good. I am asking why they know about me." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Under the warm yellow light, his face looked tired, like the face of a man who had carried a secret for too long. "Clara, there are some things I need to tell you." My heartbeat slowed. "About Nexus AI. About me." He looked down at his hands. The hands my father had once called dirty. The hands that had fixed the broken chair on our balcony. The hands that had held mine at our wedding while the entire room waited for me to fall apart. The garage in Queens is real, Ethan said. I own it. I still fix cars whenever I have time. But it is not my main work. My throat went dry. Then what is your main work? He looked up. I work in technology. I let out a quiet laugh. That is what people say when they are hiding something. Yes. That one word made the small kitchen feel colder. I am not poor, Clara. I stared at him, trying to find the simple mechanic I had fallen in love with inside the words now breaking open between us. What does not poor mean? It means I have money. More than you think. I stood up because I needed space to breathe. You let me believe you had nothing. You watched my father humiliate me at our wedding for marrying a poor man, and you stayed silent. Pain passed through his eyes. I know. And I am sorry. Why? Ethan spoke slowly. Because I have lived too long in a world where people only loved the valuable version of me. I wanted to know whether without money, without a title, without power, anyone would still choose me. I wanted to be angry. But part of me understood that fear because I had also wondered whether anyone would still see me if I no longer had the Whitmore name. When were you planning to tell me? At the Technology Charity Gala next month. Nexus AI is the main sponsor. I want you to come with me. Why there? Because some truths, when spoken, sound like excuses. I want you to see it with your own eyes. After that, you have the right to decide whether you can forgive me. He placed a cream-colored envelope on the table. Inside was an invitation printed in gold letters. Guest of honor. Ethan Hale. I stared at that line for a long time. The man in front of me was still the one who made coffee every morning, still the one who held me when I cried. But clearly he was also someone I had never fully known. That night I barely slept. Ethan lay still beside me without touching me, as if he were afraid that even tenderness could become pressure. I did not know how that gala would change everything. I only knew that when the man my family had called nothing was being invited as the guest of honor by Nexus AI, the truth behind him was far bigger than I had imagined. The gala night at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was so bright that I felt as if I were stepping into a world that did not belong to me. Outside the entrance, luxury cars lined up one after another. Inside, champagne glittered in the hands of people who could decide a company's fate with a single nod. I wore the black dress Ethan had given me. He wore a black suit with no logo, no showy watch. But what confused me was the way people looked at him. They did not look at him like a mechanic who had wandered into high society. They looked at him like the man they had been waiting for all evening. Then I saw my father. Victor Whitmore was standing near the auction area holding a glass of champagne, my mother beside him in a silver dress. Nolan stood behind them, laughing with a group of friends. My father looked like a man who was certain he was about to win. When his eyes met mine, that smile slowed. Then he looked at Ethan, and the contempt immediately returned. Clara, he said. I did not realize this event had lowered its guest standards that far. He looked Ethan up and down. Are you here to fix someone's car? A few people nearby heard him. No one laughed. Ethan only said, Good evening, mister. Whitmore. Do not try to act as if you belong here. My father lowered his voice. A decent suit does not turn you into a man of value. My face burned, but Ethan placed a gentle hand on my back. Some battles did not need shouting. The lights in the grand hall began to dim. The host stepped onto the stage. The large screen displayed the Nexus AI logo. Ladies and gentlemen, the host said, for the first time, the founder and CEO of Nexus AI Technologies will make a public appearance. Whispers spread through the room. My father straightened. He had been pursuing a data center contract with Nexus for 2 years. The host continued, Nexus AI is currently valued at more than $4 billion. Please welcome the man behind it all. Ethan turned to me. His eyes softened. Now you will know the whole truth. I could not breathe. The host smiled. The founder and CEO of Nexus AI Technologies, Ethan Hale. The room exploded with applause. Ethan released my hand and walked onto the stage. My father stood frozen. His champagne glass stopped in midair. My mother went pale. Nolan's mouth fell open like a child who had just realized his own joke had turned around to bite him. On the screen, Ethan's name appeared in huge letters. Ethan Hale, founder and CEO, Nexus AI Technologies. The mechanic from Queens. The man who had been called trash at my wedding. The man my father had said had nothing to bring to the table. He stood there under the lights, calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment, not to take revenge, but to let the truth step out on its own. When the speech ended, the entire hall rose to its feet in applause. 500 powerful people were clapping for the man my family had once treated like an embarrassment. Ethan came down from the stage and walked straight toward my father. Esther, Whitmore, he said. I heard you wanted to discuss a partnership with Nexus AI. My father blinked, then recovered his businessman's smile. Ethan, this is wonderful. I always knew Clara had an eye for talent. No, Ethan replied. You called me a parasite. You said I had nothing but dirty hands and empty pockets? My father's smile stiffened. I did not know who you were. That is exactly the problem. I am still the same person. Only the way you value me has changed. Around us, phones were raised again. This time, my father was being surrounded by his own arrogance. As for the data center deal, Ethan continued, Nexus AI will not be working with Whitmore Holdings. I will not place my company's future in the hands of a man who treats family like an asset to be bought and sold. If you have ever been underestimated because of your appearance, your job, or where you came from, comment they were wrong. Because sometimes justice does not need to shout. It only needs the truth to be spoken at the right moment, in front of the right people. That night, Manhattan learned that Victor Whitmore had destroyed the biggest deal of his life with his own hands. The next morning, my father's story was everywhere. Not in the way he had ever wanted. Business pages reposted the video from the wedding where Victor Whitmore called my husband a man with nothing. Social blogs cut together the moment he stood frozen at the gala when Ethan was introduced as the CEO of Nexus AI. The people who had once been afraid to upset him were now beginning to laugh behind his back. Within a week, Whitmore Holdings lost 3 major partners. One investor pulled out of a project along the Hudson. The board demanded that my father explain his judgment. What hurt him most was probably not the money he lost, but the power he lost to make people afraid of him. Nolan also disappeared from social media for several days, as if silence could erase everything he had once mocked. My mother called many times. Eventually, I answered. She cried, and said she had always been on my side, that she had only been afraid of my father's anger. But I had read the email she had sent him before the wedding. In it, she wrote that they should let me suffer for a few months, then I would come back and marry the man they had chosen. You were not just silent, I said. You helped father punish me. If you want to be in my life, you will have to prove it with actions. I hung up before she could turn her tears into a rope to pull me back. My father came by on a quiet, rainy afternoon. No private car. No assistant. No perfect suit. He stood outside the door of my Brooklyn apartment, looking much older than he had the week before. I was wrong, he said. I used to think that if I ever heard those words, I would cry. But I only felt tired. Some apologies come too late, not because they are meaningless, but because the person receiving them has already spent too long healing alone. I do not need you to get on your knees, I said. I only need you to understand that I am not happy because Ethan is rich. I was happy when I believed he was only a mechanic. I am happy because for the first time I am loved without being priced. My father looked around the small apartment at the old table, the cheap vase of flowers and the wedding photos on the wall. This time he did not comment on what they were worth. I do not know how to be a father without control, he said. Then learn. 1 year later, Reed Creative had 15 employees. I was no longer the girl thrown out of a golden cage. I was someone who had built her own door. Ethan still went to the garage on weekends, his hands stained with motor oil, just like the day I met him. Now I understood that it had never been a disguise. It was the part of him that helped him remember who he was when the whole world called him a billionaire. My relationship with my father was not healed, but he had started therapy. Sometimes he invited me for coffee and asked about my company before talking about his. That Christmas Eve snow fell outside the window of Ethan's mother's house in Connecticut. There was no crystal, no service staff, no one measuring my worth by my ring or my dress. There was only laughter, the smell of warm pie, and Ethan's hand resting on my back. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I thought about the penthouse, the trust fund, and the $200 million that had been removed from my name. Then I thought about my grandmother, about her letter, and about the day I stood at my own wedding and stopped begging anyone to love me. "No," I said. "Not even a little." Because in the end, I understood that true wealth is not found in the amount of money someone promises you in exchange for obedience. It is found in the peace you feel when you step out of their shadow and realize you are still whole. I did not lose my family on my wedding day. I only lost the illusion that everyone who shares your blood knows how to love. And from that wreckage I found myself again,